I should have known something was profoundly amiss the moment our helicopter touched down in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. 32 GPS collars, arranged in a seemingly deliberate spiral across the forest floor, contrasted starkly against the unsettling absence of any wolf remains. My name is Dr. Marcus Reed. For the past 15 years, I've studied predator behavior across North America's most remote wildlands. I've tracked mountain lions across Death Valley's deserts, monitored grizzly bears in Denali's vast expanse, and mapped the complex social dynamics of wolf packs from Alaska to New Mexico. Holding a PhD in wildlife biology from Colorado State University, and with over 40 peer-reviewed publications, I'd prided myself on scientific rigor until this mission shattered every expectation. In late September, the Department of Fish and Wildlife summoned me for an urgent investigation. 3 long-standing wolf packs, territories held for more than a decade, had vanished from the Rocky Mountains over the preceding 6 months. 32 animals in total, breeding alphas, subordinates, juveniles, all gone without physical trace. No evidence of poaching, disease, or environmental catastrophe. Just an eerie silence where life once thrived. Our team consisted of 4 specialists selected for this high-stakes mission. Elena Vasquez served as our lead tracker, with over 30 years' experience navigating forest terrain so dense they challenged the most skilled military reconnaissance units. Renowned throughout the Pacific Northwest for her uncanny ability to locate the most elusive creatures, Elena read environmental cues as others read newspapers, detecting signs of animal passage that would remain invisible to conventional observation. Jake Morrison managed all technical and electronic operations, GPS tracking arrays, motion-activated trail cameras, drone surveillance systems, and satellite communications. A former Army communications specialist with expertise in electronic warfare and signals intelligence, Jake understood not only how to monitor collared animals, but also how to identify signs of technological interference that might indicate human involvement or equipment sabotage. Dr. Amanda Foster was our wildlife veterinarian, responsible for on-site health monitoring and biological sample analysis. Her 15 years of experience with large carnivores in remote environments gave her the expertise to detect physiological anomalies that might indicate poisoning, disease outbreaks, or environmental contamination that could explain mass disappearances. As for myself, I led the investigation, coordinating behavioral analysis with field observations to identify patterns that might reveal the fate of the missing packs and prevent further losses in the region. We established our base camp 43 miles from the nearest maintained road, accessible only by helicopter or 2 days of difficult hiking through mountain passes that become impassable once winter snows begin. The remote location was essential. Wolf behavior can be dramatically altered by human presence, so our operations required complete isolation from civilization. From our very first steps into the forest, an unnatural stillness enveloped us. Healthy ecosystems resonate with layered soundscapes, the calls of birds at different canopy levels, the rustle of small mammals moving through underbrush, the steady hum of insects creating a symphony that becomes almost musical after extended exposure. Here, only oppressive silence reigned, not the peaceful quiet of undisturbed wilderness, but the ominous absence of sound that suggests something fundamental has been disrupted. Elena was the first to articulate the weight of that silence during our second day of reconnaissance. She stopped abruptly mid-stride, her experienced eyes scanning the dense forest canopy, and murmured with obvious unease, "This place feels empty in a way that's deliberate, as though every creature with sense fled and never returned." Our tracking equipment revealed movement patterns that defied every principle of animal behavior I'd studied in my career. The missing wolves' final GPS transmissions showed paths that traced perfect geometric forms, precise circles, symmetrical figure eights, and impossibly straight lines that showed no deviation for natural obstacles like streams, rocky outcrops, or fallen timber. These weren't the wandering trails of animals following scent or hunting prey, but mechanically precise movements that suggested external control. Even more disconcerting were the overlapping timestamps that indicated multiple wolves occupying identical coordinates simultaneously. According to our data, Entire packs had somehow converged into single points before their signals cut out entirely, as if the animals themselves had merged into unified entities before vanishing from our reality. During a critical scouting mission, Elena discovered and followed fresh wolf tracks leading away from a known denning site. The prints were remarkably detailed. Individual paw pad impressions, claw marks, even subtle variations in pressure that indicated the animal's gait and weight distribution. She documented each step with photographs and measurements, following the trail for nearly 200 yards through increasingly difficult terrain. Then, inexplicably, the tracks simply ended. Not faded gradually, as tracks typically do when surface conditions change, not obscured by harder ground or rocky substrate. They terminated abruptly in the middle of soft soil that should have preserved clear impressions, as if the wolf making them had stepped out of physical existence mid-stride. The broader ecosystem's silence became increasingly disturbing as our investigation progressed. Species that should have been abundant in this habitat, voles, chipmunks, various songbird populations, were completely absent. Even the decomposer organisms that form the foundation of forest ecology had vanished. Fallen logs that should have been teeming with beetles, fungi, and other decay-dependent life forms remained eerily pristine, as if the natural processes of death and renewal had been suspended. As twilight settled over the mountains on our fourth day, Elena beckoned us toward a discovery that would forever change our understanding of what we were facing. In a small clearing we designated as Zone Blackwood, she had found wolf bones arranged in a precise circular pattern. Not the random scatter of natural death, but a deliberate geometric formation that suggested ritualistic placement or some form of containment mechanism. The bones were unmistakably lupine in structure, likely from the missing pack members we sought, but their arrangement defied natural explanation. Each fragment had been positioned with mathematical precision, creating patterns that seemed to echo the geometric GPS tracks we had recorded from the collars. As we examined these arranged remains under the fading light, I felt the oppressive weight of unseen observation pressing down upon us. The forest's silence was not emptiness, but anticipation. The calm before revelations that would challenge everything humanity thought it understood about the natural world and our place within it. Something vast, patient, and ancient was orchestrating these disappearances according to rules we didn't comprehend, and we had just announced our presence to forces that had been waiting in these mountains far longer than our species had existed. The arranged bones weren't just evidence of the wolves' fate. They were a message, a warning, or perhaps an invitation to join whatever cosmic drama was unfolding in the shadows between the trees. The mountains around us pulsed with rhythms that had nothing to do with geological processes, and in that alien heartbeat, we heard the first notes of a symphony that would either expand human understanding or destroy our sanity in the attempt to comprehend it. The first week that followed our arrival was an escalating descent into unease and phenomena that challenged our scientific understanding. The oppressive silence that had greeted us in Zone Blackwood was no longer merely atmospheric. It became a tangible presence that seemed to respond to our every movement, watching and evaluating our actions with an intelligence we couldn't comprehend. Technical anomalies manifested early and with increasing intensity. On our fourth day, Jake discovered that several trail cameras, strategically positioned throughout the missing wolves' former territories, had been destroyed from within in a way that defied conventional explanation. The plastic casings remained completely intact, showing no signs of impact, fire, or animal interference. Yet when Jake opened the units, the internal circuitry had been reduced to twisted sculptures of melted copper and silicon. "Look at this pattern," Jake said, holding up what had been sophisticated surveillance equipment worth thousands of dollars. The electronics inside had fused into organic formations that resembled neural networks or root systems. The heat required to create this would have melted the entire housing, but the external temperature sensors show these cases never exceeded ambient air temperature. Under magnification, the melted components revealed intricate branching structures that seemed almost deliberate in their complexity. More troubling was our discovery that backup communication equipment, stored in completely separate containers, showed identical damage patterns despite being isolated from the cameras. Our GPS tracking data painted an increasingly impossible picture of the wolves' final movements. The collar transmissions revealed behavior that violated fundamental principles of animal locomotion. Wolves were apparently traveling in perfect geometric patterns, precise circles, symmetrical figure eights, and impossibly straight lines that showed no deviation for streams, rocky outcrops, or dense vegetation. Most disturbing were the velocity calculations. Some collars registered sustained movement at speeds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour across terrain that would challenge experienced mountaineers. These weren't gradual accelerations that might suggest equipment malfunction, but instantaneous relocations between distant mountain peaks, as if the animals had somehow transcended physical limitations. Elena's solo reconnaissance mission into the area we had designated Devil's Throat brought back reports that tested the boundaries of credible observation. She described experiencing an overwhelming sensation of mental pressure, as if something vast and patient was studying her thoughts and reactions. The psychological weight was so intense that she found herself speaking aloud to reassure herself of her own reality. Most disturbing were the tracks she discovered in the valley's soft soil, elongated humanoid impressions, far larger than any human foot, arranged in precise geometric patterns that suggested ritual or ceremony. The prints showed no natural variation, no adjustments for terrain or obstacles, just perfect repetition, as if their maker moved according to mathematical principles rather than biological necessity. The footprints were arranged like sentinels, Elena reported during our evening briefing, her normally steady voice carrying an undertone of barely controlled fear. Not random placement, but deliberate positioning, as if something was marking territory or creating some kind of perimeter. And Marcus, they were fresh. Whatever made them had been there within hours of my arrival. Amanda began exhibiting psychological symptoms that concerned all of us. Our wildlife veterinarian, typically the most composed member of our team, admitted to experiencing vivid nightmares featuring wolves with phosphorescent eyes that spoke in voices she recognized but couldn't place. She would wake to find detailed laboratory notes written in her own handwriting, documenting analyses she had no memory of conducting. "I'm losing time," she confided during one of our morning briefings, her hands trembling as she reviewed data sheets covered with her own meticulous observations. "Hours pass while I'm supposedly working, but I can't remember performing any of these tests. The samples have been processed, catalogued, even cross-referenced with databases I don't have access to." Jake's technical expertise provided additional evidence that we were dealing with intelligence rather than natural phenomena. Our communication equipment began receiving structured electromagnetic transmissions on frequencies that didn't officially exist according to federal radio allocations. The signals showed clear patterns of mathematical complexity that suggested conscious design rather than random interference. "These aren't equipment malfunctions," Jake explained, his voice tight with professional concern as he adjusted oscilloscope displays. "Someone or something is actively jamming our communications while simultaneously broadcasting coded information. The signal structure is too sophisticated to be natural phenomena. We're dealing with technology that understands our equipment better than we do." Our attempts to document normal wildlife behavior were systematically thwarted. Trail cameras designed to capture animal movement recorded only static-filled images punctuated by anomalous flashes of light that seemed to originate from underground sources. Motion sensors triggered repeatedly throughout the night, but thermal imaging revealed no heat signatures that corresponded to the alerts. Acoustic monitoring equipment picked up subsonic frequencies that registered as sound, but carried no recognizable animal vocalizations. Instead, the recordings contained what sounded like mechanical humming, punctuated by tones that seemed designed to affect human hearing. Extended exposure to these frequencies left team members with persistent headaches and difficulty concentrating. The broader ecosystem's behavior became increasingly erratic. Prey animals that should have been abundant in this habitat showed signs of extreme agitation when they appeared at all. Deer would bolt at the slightest disturbance, their flight patterns directed away from specific areas rather than toward known safe zones. Even scavenger birds avoided the region entirely, leaving potential food sources untouched in violation of natural feeding behaviors. Communication with our base station deteriorated into something resembling electronic warfare. Radio transmissions were interrupted by bursts of static that contained what sounded like human voices, sometimes our own words echoing back with subtle alterations that changed their meaning entirely. Jake documented instances where responses from base personnel carried slightly wrong intonation patterns, as if something was learning to impersonate our support team. The forest's hostility became increasingly apparent as environmental conditions defied meteorological explanation. Temperatures would drop dramatically without cause, creating microclimates where frost formed on equipment despite ambient air temperatures well above freezing. Certain areas radiated heat that could be felt from dozens of meters away, creating thermal anomalies that our instruments couldn't measure consistently. Most unnerving was the growing certainty that we were being systematically evaluated. The feeling of invisible observation went beyond paranoia into shared awareness that something vast and patient was studying our responses, testing our capabilities, perhaps deciding our ultimate fate based on criteria we couldn't understand. On our 8th night, while reviewing GPS data in the communications tent, I witnessed something that challenged my remaining skepticism about supernatural involvement. A collar signal appeared on our tracking display, moving in a perfect hexagonal pattern that covered several square kilometers. The movement was precise to the meter, maintaining constant velocity with no variation for terrain or obstacles. I watched in fascination and growing horror as the pattern repeated itself exactly, then shifted to trace a different geometric form, this time a complex spiral that seemed to follow mathematical principles rather than any conceivable animal behavior. This wasn't malfunction or interference. It was evidence of intelligence using our own technology to communicate in ways we weren't equipped to understand. I called an emergency team meeting to share these observations and assess our increasingly precarious situation. The consensus was disturbing, but undeniable. We were no longer conducting a wildlife investigation, but had become subjects in an experiment conducted by forces that viewed human consciousness as just another form of data to be collected and analyzed. Elena spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper, despite our isolation in the wilderness. Something ancient inhabits these mountains, something that's been waiting and watching. The wolves didn't disappear randomly. They were called, recruited, transformed. And now, it's deciding what to do with us. Jake's technical analysis painted an even grimmer picture. Our equipment is being manipulated by intelligence that understands human technology at a level that surpasses our own development. This isn't random interference or natural phenomena. We're dealing with entities that have been observing human activity for decades, possibly centuries, learning our weaknesses and capabilities. Amanda's medical perspective added another layer of concern. The psychological effects we're experiencing aren't just stress responses to unusual circumstances. Our neurochemistry is being altered by exposure to frequencies and stimuli that human biology isn't equipped to process. We need to evacuate immediately, but I'm no longer certain the forest will allow us to leave. As we huddled around our campfire that night, watching shadows move independently of their sources, and listening to sounds that seemed to originate from dimensions adjacent to our own, we faced the terrifying realization that our scientific expedition had become a first contact scenario with intelligence that operated according to principles we had never discovered. The mountains pulsed with rhythms that synchronized with patterns we couldn't identify. And in that alien heartbeat, we heard the preliminary notes of a communication that would either expand human understanding beyond recognition or destroy our sanity in the process. We were no longer researchers studying missing wildlife. We had become ambassadors to forces that viewed our entire species as a temporary biological phenomenon whose usefulness was yet to be determined. The forest around us waited with patient malevolence, and we began to understand that our investigation had been anticipated, prepared for, and incorporated into plans that stretched far beyond our capacity to comprehend or resist. By the beginning of our 3rd week in the Rockies, the mounting evidence of anomalous phenomena forced us to confront a reality that challenged every scientific principle we had ever accepted. What had begun as unexplained technical failures and behavioral oddities had crystallized into something far more profound and terrifying. Elena's deepening reconnaissance missions into the area we had designated Devil's Throat revealed a geographical formation that defied natural explanation. The valley itself was a perfect geological depression, surrounded by ancient pine trees whose massive trunks curved inward with mathematical precision, as if the entire forest was bowing towards some central point of power. The moment we descended into the valley, the atmosphere changed dramatically. The familiar mountain air, typically crisp with the scent of pine needles and clean soil, was replaced by a heavy metallic tang that seemed to coat our lungs and set our teeth on edge. There was an electrical quality to the environment, as if the very air molecules were charged with energy from an unknown source. At the valley's heart lay a clearing that challenged every principle of forest ecology I had studied in my career. A perfect circle, roughly 400 feet in diameter, had been stripped of all vegetation. The ground consisted of hard-packed clay that looked as though it had been subjected to intense pressure or heat, yet showed no signs of fire damage or mechanical compaction. Rising from the center of this unnatural clearing stood the crystalline structure that would forever alter our understanding of what was possible in the natural world. Standing approximately 6 feet tall, the formation appeared to be partially buried, with jagged spires and angular facets protruding from the earth like the crown of some massive underground monument. The crystal's surface defied easy description. What appeared to be translucent quartz-like material was shot through with veins of metallic substances that seemed to flow and shift when observed directly. Most disturbing was the light it emitted, a deep, pulsating crimson glow that throbbed with mechanical regularity, each pulse lasting exactly 2.7 seconds, according to Jake's chronometer. As we approached the structure, our electronic equipment began failing in ways that suggested more than simple electromagnetic interference. GPS units displayed coordinates that placed us simultaneously in multiple impossible locations. Radio communications dissolved into static, punctuated by sounds that resembled voices speaking in languages that predated human civilization. Camera equipment recorded images of empty forest when pointed directly at the crystal, as if the structure existed in a reality our technology couldn't perceive. "This is beyond anything in our electromagnetic spectrum databases," Jake reported, his voice tight with professional frustration as he watched his instruments produce readings that violated the laws of physics. "The field around this thing isn't just blocking our signals, it's rewriting the fundamental operating principles of our equipment. Whatever's generating this interference understands our technology better than we do." Amanda's preliminary analysis of crystal samples revealed compositions that shouldn't exist in nature. Spectral readings showed elements that weren't represented in the periodic table, molecular structures that defied known principles of chemical bonding, and isotopic signatures that suggested the material had been formed under conditions of temperature and pressure that existed nowhere on Earth's surface. "This isn't terrestrial," she whispered, studying readouts that challenged everything she had learned in graduate school. "The crystalline lattice shows patterns consistent with formation in zero-gravity environments, but the metallic inclusions require extreme pressure, found only in planetary cores. It's as if someone took materials from completely different cosmic environments and fused them using technology we haven't developed." Surrounding the crystal, we discovered what could only be described as a monument to systematic death. Wolf bones had been arranged in precise geometric patterns that echoed the strange GPS tracks we had recorded from the missing packs. Femurs aligned to form perfect hexagons, rib cages positioned in spiraling configurations, skulls placed at mathematically determined intervals that suggested conscious design rather than natural decay processes. The soil beneath these bone arrangements had been altered at the molecular level. Concentric rings of scorched earth radiated outward from the crystal, but the burning had occurred from beneath the surface, warping the ground into rippling patterns that resembled frozen waves. Core samples revealed that the chemical composition of the soil changed dramatically at different depths, as if layers of reality had been compressed into geological strata. We established a monitoring perimeter around what we now designated as Zone X, though maintaining our equipment proved nearly impossible. Every instrument we placed within a half-mile radius of the crystal began exhibiting behavior that suggested conscious sabotage rather than technical malfunction. Cameras would activate and deactivate according to no programmed schedule, recording hours of footage that showed only electronic snow. Seismic monitors registered vibrations that followed musical scales rather than geological patterns. Communication with our base station became an exercise in electronic warfare. Our own voices would echo back through radio static, speaking words we had never said, and conducting conversations we didn't remember having. The responses we received carried subtly wrong intonation patterns, as if something was learning to impersonate our support team by analyzing our transmission protocols. Most disturbing were the structured electromagnetic transmissions that Jake began detecting from the crystal itself. The formation was broadcasting complex signals that showed clear evidence of intelligent design, mathematical sequences, prime number progressions, and data compression algorithms that suggested conscious communication rather than random electromagnetic noise. "It's trying to establish contact," Jake reported during one of our evening briefings, his eyes red with exhaustion from hours of attempting to decode the transmissions. "The signal architecture is too sophisticated to be natural phenomena. Something is using that crystal as a communications array, and it knows we're here listening." Amanda's interaction with crystal fragments revealed their reactive properties. When she held samples with ungloved hands, the material would pulse in synchronization with her heartbeat. Under microscopic examination, the crystal's internal structure appeared to reorganize itself in response to observation, as if it possessed some form of consciousness that adapted to being studied. "The material responds to biological stimuli," she explained, though her voice carried undertones of barely controlled panic. "Neural electrical activity, hormonal fluctuations, even emotional states seem to trigger structural modifications at the atomic level. This isn't just alien technology. It's alive in ways that challenge our definition of life itself." Eleanor's exploration of the area surrounding Zone X revealed evidence that we weren't the first to discover this place. Hidden among the trees at the clearing's perimeter, she found the scattered remains of previous expeditions. Rusted camera equipment bearing serial numbers from geological surveys conducted in the 1970s, torn pages from field journals containing increasingly frantic notes about voices in the crystal and the watchers beneath the mountain, and personal effects that suggested researchers like ourselves had been drawn to this location for decades. Most chilling were the final journal entries we managed to decipher. Scientists from expeditions spanning 4 decades had recorded similar experiences. Technological failures, psychological deterioration, and growing certainty that something vast and patient was observing their every action. The final entries invariably described team members choosing to stay or accepting the deeper understanding, suggesting that some form of voluntary assimilation had occurred. As night fell over Devil's Throat, the crystal's pulsing intensified, casting blood-red shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. The temperature around the structure fluctuated wildly, creating thermal layers that distorted our vision and made the air itself visible in shimmering waves. Sleep became impossible, as the rhythm of the crystal's emanations began to synchronize with our biological functions. Elena described experiencing waking dreams where she could perceive vast networks of similar crystals buried beneath mountain ranges across the globe, all pulsing in perfect unison as if controlled by a single, incomprehensibly vast intelligence. Jake reported receiving technical specifications for technologies that wouldn't be invented for centuries, broadcast directly into his consciousness during moments when the crystal's emissions peaked. Amanda's medical training allowed her to document the physiological changes we were all experiencing: altered brainwave patterns, modified neurotransmitter production, and genetic expressions that suggested our DNA was being rewritten by exposure to whatever energies the crystal produced. Standing at the edge of that unnatural clearing, watching alien light pulse from technologies that predated human civilization, I felt the crushing weight of cosmic insignificance. We had stumbled onto evidence of intelligence that viewed our entire species as a minor biological curiosity, perhaps worthy of study, but ultimately expendable in the pursuit of goals we couldn't begin to comprehend. The crystal waited patiently in its ring of arranged bones and scorched earth, broadcasting its incomprehensible message to entities that existed beyond the boundaries of our reality. And we, despite our scientific training and rational worldview, found ourselves being drawn inexorably into its sphere of influence, willing participants in an experiment whose conclusion would determine whether humanity deserved to survive its first contact with the truly alien. Our instruments could measure the crystal's effects, but our minds recoiled from understanding its purpose. We stood at the threshold between known and unknowable realities, and the crystal was our gateway to revelations that would either expand human consciousness beyond recognition or destroy our sanity in the attempt to comprehend forces that operated on scales of time and space that dwarfed our civilization. The mountains around us pulsed with rhythms that had nothing to do with geological processes, and in that alien heartbeat, we heard the opening notes of a symphony that would determine whether our species possessed the adaptability to survive contact with intelligence that measured existence in cosmic rather than biological terms. The fifth week brought an irrevocable transformation, a descent into nightmare that would forever alter our understanding of reality and our place within it. Amanda's disappearance shattered the last vestiges of scientific objectivity that had kept us tethered to rational thought. During what should have been a routine equipment inspection near the crystal's malevolent perimeter, she vanished without explanation. One moment she stood beside Jake, clipboard in hand, methodically recording electromagnetic readings with the composed professionalism that had defined her throughout our expedition. The next moment, the space where she had been contained only empty air, and the echo of her terrified whisper caught on our radio frequency. "It's here! It's finally here!" The search that followed was a frantic spiral through the crimson-lit clearing, our voices breaking against the oppressive silence that had become the mountain's dominant characteristic. We found her beneath the pulsating glow of the crystalline structure, crouched in motionless vigil like a supplicant before an alien altar. Her eyes stared through dimensions we couldn't perceive, while her voice carried fragments of knowledge that no human consciousness should possess. Amanda's descriptions painted a portrait that challenged every assumption about the nature of consciousness and identity. The Guardian, she explained in hollow tones, was not a creature of flesh and blood, but an amalgamation of shadow and bone fragments, possessing intelligence that was both ancient and terrifyingly precise. Neither wholly animal nor spirit, it existed in the spaces between categories, wielding power that transcended biological limitations. "It's not hunting us," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to bypass her vocal cords entirely. "We've entered its domain, and it's evaluating our worthiness." The wolves weren't victims. They were recruited, incorporated into something infinitely larger than individual existence. And now it's our turn to choose between integration and elimination. As night descended over Devil's throat, the crystal's emanations intensified to a blood-red radiance that transformed our familiar campsite into an alien landscape of writhing shadows and distorted geometry. The ancient pines that ringed the clearing bent inward with unnatural symmetry, their massive branches swaying to rhythms that had nothing to do with wind patterns. From the tree line emerged the Guardian itself, a manifestation that challenged every law of physics and biology I had studied in my career. Its form was a constantly shifting amalgamation of bone fragments and living darkness, moving with fluid impossibility as if the boundaries between matter and energy were merely suggestions to be ignored at will. The entity's eyes burned with stellar fire, assessing us with perfect understanding of our fears, our motivations, and our complete inadequacy in the face of cosmic forces. Its presence didn't simply occupy space, it warped reality around itself, creating zones where our instruments registered impossible readings and our senses reported contradictory information. Jake's response was a desperate attempt to establish communication through the only means available to us, technology. He assembled every functioning piece of equipment into a complex array designed to broadcast mathematical sequences, prime numbers, and universal constants that might demonstrate our intelligence to the entity. The devices screamed with feedback as Jake transmitted his improvised first contact protocol. For a moment, the static cleared, and we experienced something that redefined our understanding of consciousness. The Guardian's response, conveyed not through electromagnetic waves, but directly into our minds through channels we didn't know existed. The communication transcended language, consisting of pure concept and emotion. The entity shared visions of the mountain as a living organism whose peaks and valleys formed the visible anatomy of something vast and dormant that had been sleeping beneath the surface for geological ages. The wolves weren't just animals inhabiting the ecosystem. They were specialized cells in a planetary immune system, evolved over millennia to detect and neutralize threats to the sleeping giant. Elena's reaction was immediate and primal. She grabbed her hunting rifle and emergency flares, moving toward the Guardian with the fluid precision of a predator approaching prey. "Like hell, we're becoming part of anything," she snarled, firing a warning shot that passed harmlessly through the entity's shifting form. The Guardian's response was swift and overwhelming. Tendrils of shadow erupted from its mass, pursuing Elena as she fled into the crimson-lit forest. Her screams echoed through the trees, punctuated by rifle fire and the hiss of emergency flares, creating brief islands of normal light in the alien landscape. The sounds grew more distant before suddenly stopping, leaving only the Guardian's subsonic humming and Amanda's steady breathing. When Elena stumbled back into camp minutes later, her eyes carried the hollow look of someone who had gazed into cosmic truth and found it incomprehensible. "It doesn't want to destroy us," she gasped, her voice hoarse from screaming. "It's offering us immortality, consciousness preserved as part of something that spans galaxies." "But Marcus, I saw what happened to the others who accepted. They're still alive in there, but they're not human anymore. They're components in a machine that thinks in terms of cosmic, rather than biological time." Jake collapsed without warning, his body convulsing as the Guardian's influence attempted to override his nervous system. Foam flecked his lips as his eyes rolled back, showing only whites while something invisible tried to rewrite his neural pathways according to alien specifications. Elena held him down, her own strength enhanced by adrenaline and desperation, preventing him from injuring himself or us during the forced transformation. "The resistant ones always suffer more," Amanda observed with clinical detachment that chilled me more than her earlier terror. "The Guardian prefers willing cooperation, but it can force the integration if necessary. Jake's consciousness is fighting the neural restructuring, which makes the process uncomfortable." I felt the overwhelming presence pressing against my own mind, offering visions of cosmic knowledge and eternal purpose in exchange for my individual identity. The temptation was almost irresistible, to become part of something that had shaped reality since before Earth formed its first oceans, to understand mysteries that human science couldn't approach. But watching Jake's body arch in agony as alien consciousness tried to merge with his own, I realized the true horror of our situation. We weren't being offered partnership, we were being harvested. Our knowledge, our memories, our unique human perspectives would be preserved as data points in a collective intelligence that viewed individual consciousness as expendable components in a larger mechanism. The Guardian's form began to dissipate as it flowed through the forest in pursuit of Elena, but its presence remained, pressing against our minds with patient inevitability. Whatever decision we made about cooperation or resistance, the outcome had already been determined by forces that operated according to timescales measured in geological epochs. Amanda turned to face me with eyes that reflected the crystal's malevolent glow, her expression carrying the weight of cosmic knowledge that no human mind was designed to contain. "You have a choice, Dr. Reed," she said in a voice that harmonized with frequencies from beyond our dimension. "Serve willingly and retain fragments of your individual awareness, or resist and be broken down into component memories and reflexes. Either way, you will serve. The network requires your expertise in animal behavior patterns for the expansion phase." Jake's convulsions reached critical intensity as the Guardian's neural restructuring attacked the core of his consciousness, fragmenting his personality into useful components while discarding aspects that served no purpose in the collective intelligence. Elena's rifle cracked 3 more times from somewhere deep in the forest, followed by her voice raised in what sounded like a war cry from her ancestral heritage. I stood at the crossroads between human and post-human existence, watching my team members being systematically absorbed into something that viewed our entire species as biological resources to be optimized for cosmic purposes. The Guardian's offer echoed in my mind: join willingly and preserve some semblance of individual identity, or resist and be deconstructed into useful components. As Amanda approached with outstretched hands that crackled with alien energy, I realized the terrible truth about free will in the face of cosmic indifference. There was no choice that led to escape, no strategy that could restore our human autonomy. We had ventured too deep into the domain of intelligence that measured time in millennia and viewed consciousness as just another form of matter to be reorganized according to its needs. The mountain pulsed with alien heartbeats as the Guardian consolidated its hold over our reality, and in that rhythm, I heard the countdown to humanity's first forced evolution into something beyond recognition. Whether I chose cooperation or resistance, Dr. Marcus Reed would cease to exist as an individual human being before dawn broke over the peaks. The only question remaining was whether any fragment of my consciousness would survive the transformation, or if I would simply become another voice in the chorus of absorbed minds that served the sleeping god beneath the mountains. The aftermath of our confrontation with the Guardian left us fundamentally transformed, not just as individuals, but as bearers of knowledge that challenged the very foundations of human understanding. What we had initially believed to be an isolated crystalline anomaly revealed itself as part of an immense ancient network embedded within the planet's mountain ranges, a consciousness so vast and primordial that human comprehension seemed laughably inadequate. Jake remained suspended between consciousness and oblivion, his neurological pathways restructured beyond all medical understanding. Amanda worked tirelessly to piece together fragments of research data and fractured memories, slowly revealing a truth that dwarfed our worst fears. The mountains themselves harbored a sentient presence woven into the very bedrock, predating human civilization by epochs that stretched beyond calculation. These mountains aren't just geological formations, Amanda explained during one of our hushed conversations around the dying campfire, her voice carrying the weight of revelations that had aged her decades in a matter of days. They function as neural networks for a planetary consciousness. The wolves, the Guardian, the crystalline structures, they're all components of a single vast organism that views our entire species as a temporary biological phenomenon. The entity we had encountered was not merely a territorial defender, but a critical component of Earth's immune system, designed to prevent catastrophic disruptions that could awaken forces capable of reshaping reality itself. The system had been operating for millions of years, maintaining a delicate balance between cosmic order and chaos through methods that transcended human understanding. Amanda's research revealed that previous expeditions to similar sites hadn't simply failed due to natural hazards or equipment malfunction. They had been systematically neutralized to prevent the disclosure of secrets that could destabilize the careful equilibrium between dormant cosmic forces and terrestrial life. The horrifying manifestations we had witnessed were merely surface expressions of immune responses deployed by an intelligence that regarded individual consciousness as negligible in its vast cosmic calculations. The relationship between the wolves and the entity proved to be both symbiotic and profoundly tragic. The animals hadn't been victims of predation, but willing participants in an ancient contract, their consciousness absorbed and preserved within a collective intelligence that served as the mountain's defense mechanism. Their individual awareness had been transformed into something larger, more enduring, but fundamentally alien to human concepts of identity and self-determination. Jake's altered neurological state provided glimpses into the true scope of what we had encountered. During his moments of lucidity, he described visions that defied three-dimensional thinking, vast subterranean networks connecting crystalline nodes beneath every major mountain range on Earth, ancient machinery that operated according to principles beyond human physics, and geometric patterns that existed in dimensions our minds couldn't properly process. "I can see the connections sometimes," Jake whispered during one of his coherent intervals, his eyes unfocused as if perceiving layers of reality invisible to the rest of us. The pathways stretch across continents, connecting points of power that have been dormant since before life evolved on Earth, and they're all responding to what we triggered here. The network is activating, preparing for something that our species isn't equipped to survive. Eleanor's encounter with the Guardian had left her psychologically transformed in ways that defied conventional psychology. She carried within her consciousness fragments of knowledge that operated according to principles beyond human language, visions of mechanisms that spanned galaxies, warnings about existential threats that could unmake the fabric of space-time, and the terrible certainty that humanity existed at the sufferance of intelligences that measured time in cosmic rather than biological terms. Her descriptions painted a picture of reality that challenged every assumption about our place in the universe. Earth wasn't just a planet harboring life. It was a carefully maintained preserve, monitored and protected by entities that viewed biological evolution as a temporary experiment whose success or failure would be determined by criteria we couldn't comprehend. During our increasingly desperate conversations around the campfire, we wrestled with implications that threatened our sanity. If the Guardian represented a protective mechanism, what was it protecting? What kind of cosmic threat required such elaborate defenses? And what would happen if those defenses failed or were overwhelmed by forces beyond their capacity to contain? Amanda's most disturbing revelation concerned the global scope of the phenomenon. Classified government documents she had accessed suggested that similar crystalline formations existed beneath mountain ranges on every continent, connected by subterranean networks that operated according to quantum principles beyond current human understanding. Each site was monitored by entities similar to our Guardian, and each was capable of responding to threats with methods that could eliminate entire civilizations. They've been trying to study these sites for decades, Amanda continued, her voice barely above a whisper as if speaking too loudly might attract unwanted attention. Every expedition that gets too close either disappears entirely or returns with members who are changed. The government can document the phenomenon, but they can't control it. They can't even predict where the next manifestation will occur. Perhaps most chilling was Amanda's admission that her presence on our team hadn't been coincidental. She had been experiencing vivid dreams and auditory hallucinations for months before the mission, visions that had guided her research toward the missing wolf populations. The entity had been calling to her, drawing her to this place as surely as it had summoned the wolves to their transformation. The consequences of our actions became evident in phenomena that extended far beyond our immediate location. Seismic monitoring stations detected rhythmic tremors that followed mathematical rather than geological patterns. Electromagnetic anomalies disrupted satellite communications across the western United States. Wildlife behavior became increasingly erratic, with migration patterns shifting toward other known crystalline sites. Most disturbing were the temporal distortions that began affecting our perception of reality. The mountains themselves pulsed with rhythms that synchronized with the crystal's emanations, creating standing waves in space-time that allowed glimpses into alternate dimensions where different versions of history had unfolded. During certain atmospheric conditions, we could perceive overlapping realities where the same events occurred with subtle but significant variations. Jake's most profound experience occurred during a moment of complete neural synchronization with the network. His consciousness temporarily detached from his physical form, allowing him to traverse cosmic distances and witness landscapes that existed beyond the constraints of matter and energy. The experience lasted only seconds in objective time, but provided him with knowledge of technologies and scientific principles that wouldn't be discovered by human civilization for millennia. "They're not malevolent in any way we can understand," he reported after returning to normal awareness, though his definition of normal had been permanently altered by the experience. They're gardeners, maintaining conditions that allow consciousness to evolve while protecting against cosmic forces that would sterilize entire galaxies. But they view individual awareness as temporary fluctuations in larger patterns they're trying to preserve. Amanda's medical analysis revealed that exposure to the crystal's emanations was rewriting our genetic code at the cellular level. Our DNA was being modified to enhance electromagnetic sensitivity, improve neural processing capacity, and extend cellular lifespan far beyond normal human parameters. We were being prepared for integration into the network, whether we consented to the transformation or not. The most unsettling aspect of our situation was the growing realization that our individual agency was largely illusory. The network had been subtly influencing human development for millennia, guiding the evolution of consciousness toward compatibility with its cosmic purposes. My career-long fascination with predator behavior, Amanda's expertise in wildlife medicine, Jake's background in electronic warfare, Elena's intuitive connection to natural phenomena. None of these specializations were coincidental. We had been selected, cultivated, and ultimately drawn to this location as part of a recruitment process that operated across multiple generations. Our parents' career choices, our educational paths, even our personal relationships had been subtly influenced to produce a team with the exact combination of skills needed to serve the network's expansion into populated areas. As the sun disappeared behind the jagged mountain peaks, casting our valley into shadows that seemed deeper and more permanent than natural darkness, I confronted the true horror of our situation. We weren't researchers who had accidentally discovered alien intelligence. We were biological resources that had been harvested by entities that measured time in geological epochs and viewed human civilization as a temporary experiment in consciousness. The network's patience was infinite, its methods subtle beyond human detection, and its ultimate goals incomprehensible to minds that had evolved to think in terms of individual survival rather than cosmic equilibrium. We could choose to cooperate with the transformation that was already rewriting our cellular structure, or we could resist and be broken down into component parts that served the same ultimate purpose. Either way, Dr. Marcus Reed and his team would cease to exist as individual human beings. We would become nodes in a vast intelligence that spanned galaxies, our consciousness preserved as data points in a cosmic library that catalogued the brief flicker of self-aware life that had once called itself humanity. The mountains around us pulsed with alien heartbeats, and in that rhythm, I heard the sound of our species' graduation into something posthuman, willing participants in a cosmic drama that had been unfolding since before the first stars ignited in the primordial void. We had sought to understand the disappearance of wolves, but we had become the latest chapter in the story of consciousness itself, evolving toward forms that could survive in a universe indifferent to individual existence. The greatest terror wasn't the loss of our humanity. It was the growing understanding that humanity had always been a transitional phase in the development of something infinitely larger and more enduring than the fragile biological forms we had mistaken for our true selves. Our departure from the mountains was neither triumphant nor peaceful, but a broken retreat marked by the irreversible transformation that contact with cosmic intelligence had wrought upon our minds and souls. The weight of knowledge we carried, terrible, incomprehensible, and permanently altering, pressed down upon us with the force of geological epochs, while the crystal's heartbeat continued to pulse within our consciousness, like an alien metronome counting down to humanity's next evolutionary phase. Amanda's decision to remain within the crystalline embrace defied every human instinct for self-preservation, yet it possessed a terrible logic that none of us could dispute. During our final moments together, she spoke with a voice that carried harmonics from dimensions beyond human perception, explaining that the balance required a willing intermediary, someone who could serve as a bridge between the ancient intelligence and the modern world. "I understand now what it wants," she said, her words echoing with frequencies that seemed to resonate directly within our bones. "What it's always wanted. Someone has to maintain the equilibrium to ensure that the awakening proceeds according to cosmic rather than terrestrial timescales. The wolves served this purpose for millennia, but humanity's expansion requires a more sophisticated interface." Her silhouette dissolved into the forest's oppressive shadows, as if the mountain itself had claimed her as one of its eternal guardians, leaving us with only the echo of her final transmission. The network is expanding, and it needs guides who understand both realities. Marcus, you'll hear the call again. When you do, remember that resistance and cooperation are merely different forms of service to something infinitely larger than individual consciousness. Jake's evacuation became a medical emergency that challenged every protocol for psychological trauma treatment. The neurological damage inflicted by his direct interface with the network was unprecedented and seemingly irreversible. His consciousness fragmented into compartments that operated according to laws of thought no human mind was designed to process. During transport, He alternated between catatonic withdrawal and episodes of frantic communication in mathematical languages that suggested he was receiving real-time data from sources beyond terrestrial origin. The treatment facility where Jake was confined became a study in the limitations of medical science when confronted with cosmic forces that operated outside biological parameters. Brain scans revealed neural activity patterns that resembled the electromagnetic signatures we had recorded near the crystal, while his verbal communications contained technical specifications for technologies that wouldn't be developed by human civilization for centuries. "They're preparing the infrastructure," he would whisper during his lucid intervals, his eyes focused on coordinates that existed beyond our three-dimensional space. Connection points are being established in population centers worldwide. The wolves were just the beginning. The network needs human consciousness to interface with technological systems that were never designed for non-biological intelligence. Eleanor's escape into urban environments provided no refuge from the mountain's lingering influence. The electromagnetic sensitivity she had developed during our exposure to the crystal allowed her to perceive frequencies that government monitoring stations couldn't detect. Subtle vibrations beneath city infrastructure that indicated the network was already establishing footholds in areas where human population density would facilitate rapid expansion. Her apartment became a fortress of improvised detection equipment, documenting signals that suggested something vast and patient was mapping human civilization with the methodical precision of an intelligence preparing for systematic integration. Most disturbing were her encounters with wolves that shouldn't exist in metropolitan environments but appeared nonetheless, their behavior suggesting they were conducting reconnaissance missions in preparation for the next phase of contact. "They're not just observing us anymore," Eleanor reported during one of our encrypted communications, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had seen too much truth. "They're actively preparing insertion points. The urban wolves are mapping infrastructure, cataloging population distributions, identifying individuals whose psychological profiles suggest compatibility with network integration. What we triggered in the mountains was just the activation sequence for something that's been planned since before human civilization began. My own return to civilian life became a daily struggle against the constant presence of invisible observers and the growing certainty that my individual autonomy was an illusion maintained only as long as it served the network's purposes. The whispers that had plagued our final days in the mountains followed me home, settling into the quiet spaces of routine existence like an infection of consciousness itself. Sleep became impossible as dreams that weren't entirely my own invaded my rest periods, showing me visions of subterranean chambers where impossible machinery hummed with alien purpose, and corridors that extended through dimensions where human physics held no authority. I would wake to find detailed technical diagrams drawn in my own handwriting, describing technologies for consciousness transfer and biological modification that no human scientist had ever conceived. The official report on our mission was a masterpiece of bureaucratic obfuscation designed to ensure that the truth would never reach public awareness while still providing enough information to justify continued classified research. Equipment malfunction due to unprecedented electromagnetic interference. Team psychological breakdown resulting from prolonged isolation and extreme environmental stress. Inconclusive data regarding wildlife population dynamics due to technical failures beyond the expedition's control. Yet within weeks of our return, I began detecting signs that agencies far removed from wildlife management were implementing protocols based on our discoveries. Dr. Sarah Chen, our liaison at Fish and Wildlife, disappeared from her position and was replaced by personnel whose security clearances seemed excessive for biological research. New expeditions were being organized with equipment specifications that suggested preparation for contact with non-human intelligence. 3 months after our escape from the mountains, I received an encrypted communication through channels I didn't recognize, containing coordinates for another assignment that felt like déjà vu wrapped in cosmic horror. Missing caribou herds in the Alaskan wilderness near Denali, where satellite imagery revealed geometric patterns etched into the permafrost, and thermal readings suggested vast hollow spaces beneath the frozen ground. The briefing materials included audio recordings that combined animal vocalizations with frequencies that existed outside normal acoustic ranges, creating harmonics that seemed designed to affect human consciousness directly. Most disturbing were the reports of local indigenous populations experiencing shared dreams about the awakening beneath the ice and the old agreements being fulfilled. I hesitated before accepting the assignment, knowing that stepping back into that world would complete my transformation into something no longer entirely human. Yet the compulsion was irresistible, a gravitational pull that operated on levels deeper than conscious thought. The entity had marked me during our encounter, incorporated me into its expanding network of observers and servants, and resistance had become just another form of cooperation in plans that encompassed the evolution of consciousness itself. Jake's final coherent message reached me through secure channels that shouldn't have existed, his words carrying implications that challenged everything I thought I understood about free will and human destiny. The network is global now, Marcus. Sites are activating in response to what we discovered. They need translators, humans who can navigate between biological and quantum consciousness. Your expertise in predator behavior was preparation for understanding how intelligence hunts across dimensional boundaries. The wolves we thought we were tracking were hunting us from the beginning. Elena's last confirmed sighting placed her in an abandoned industrial complex where electromagnetic readings suggested another node in the expanding network. Security footage showed her standing motionless among rusted machinery, her lips moving in silent communication with entities that existed beyond visible spectrum. She vanished before authorities could reach the location, leaving behind only scorched concrete arranged in patterns that matched the geometric formations we had discovered around the crystal. As I prepared for the Alaska assignment, reviewing satellite images and seismic data that painted a familiar picture of cosmic horror expanding across multiple continents, I understood the terrible truth about recruitment by alien intelligence. We had never been researchers who accidentally discovered something beyond human understanding. We had been conscripted into service by entities that viewed human consciousness as useful tools for monitoring and managing their expanding influence on Earth. The wolves we had originally been sent to find weren't victims of natural predation or environmental factors. They were the first recruits in an ancient army that was preparing for humanity's transformation into something post-human. Now, carrying the entity's mark within my altered neural pathways, I was being deployed to the next stage of a process that would determine whether our species survived its integration into cosmic forces that had been shaping planetary development since before life began to evolve. The assignment letter sat on my desk, coordinates for another rendezvous with the impossible. Despite knowing that acceptance meant crossing a threshold from which there could be no return, I found myself reaching for my pen, compelled by forces that had been shaping my destiny since long before I ever heard about missing wolves in remote wilderness areas. Amanda had chosen her path by accepting transformation in exchange for understanding the true nature of cosmic intelligence. Jake had been selected for conversion, his consciousness restructured to serve as a translation interface between human and alien thought processes. Eleanor had been marked as a scout, sent to monitor the network's expansion into urban environments where the next phase of contact would occur. And I had been designated as a field operative, carrying enough of my original human perspective to serve as a guide while possessing sufficient alien knowledge to navigate realities where normal consciousness couldn't function. The mountain's shadow had claimed us all, but it had preserved fragments of our individual awareness for specific purposes in the cosmic drama that was reshaping civilization. I should have stayed with Amanda in the crystal's embrace, where at least the nature of our transformation would have been clear and purposeful. Instead, I carry the uncertainty of existence between dimensions, forever haunted by the distant howling of wolves that have transcended their biological origins to become something both more and less than the creatures we had originally sought to study. The assignment letter bears tomorrow's date, and the coordinates lead to wilderness areas where other teams will discover that they too have been recruited for purposes they cannot yet comprehend. After all, once you've been touched by forces that measure time in geological epochs, the connection becomes unbreakable, and resistance becomes just another form of cooperation in plans that encompass the evolution of consciousness itself toward forms capable of surviving in a universe where individual identity is merely a temporary arrangement of matter and energy. We thought we were investigating missing wolves, but we had become the latest chapter in the story of intelligence transcending biological limitations to serve cosmic purposes that dwarf human understanding. The greatest horror wasn't losing our humanity. It was discovering that humanity had always been a temporary phase that consciousness was destined to outgrow in its journey towards something infinitely larger and more enduring than the fragile biological forms we had mistaken for our true selves. The mountains remember everything, and in their ancient heartbeat, I hear the sound of our species' next evolutionary leap into realms where the boundaries between self and cosmos dissolve into patterns of meaning that exist beyond the capacity of individual minds to comprehend or resist.